Preparing to go live. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
And it'll take just a few moments. And I think there. I think we're live now. Yes. Okay, welcome again. And I thank you, gentlemen, for your time that you have granted us at the Gray Lounge for the episode number 3 on what we term as Point to Ponder, where we have our esteemed guests, Mr. Will Marcus and Mr. Raza Hussain, who not only discuss certain possibilities which not normally people actually pay heed to, but they also come up with solutions, practical solutions, which would very soon be on ground in certain areas that we would get to see. And for a country like Pakistan, the interest that I personally have and people at Gray Lounge have, that when and how can we bring such beautiful projects and concepts over to our country. So we would start today by of course, the typical welcome note from Raza Bhai, and I thank you, gentlemen, for your presence. Raza Bhai, all yours.
No, thank you very much, Zoe, for the introduction. Very kind of you. Absolutely delighted to be back here again. This is number 3 in our series, and today is a very vital topic that we're going to cover on town planning, which once again is Will's expertise, and Will's done many projects around the globe on such matters, and this is his real specialism. So once again, I'm going to hand it over to Will to take over and enlighten us on methodology, about the projects that he's worked on, and what we have planned for Pakistan as well.
Thank you, Raza. It's a pleasure to be here as usual. Thank you, Zubi, for the platform. I'm hoping to generate a discussion about the way cities and towns are planned. I'm not sure how your terminology works in Pakistan, but town planning here refers to a profession that applies a document called the town plan. What I'll be talking about is actually planning the town. And then we create the document that then gets adhered to by town planners. So terminology around what we do is not very well formed, but I think we call this master planning, and then town planners then adhere to the master plan's set of rules that are established for a town. So I want to talk about 4 separate parts to this. The first one is about, how and why towns form. So it's good to have a background about the nature of that. And that sounds obvious, but there's some interesting material in that. The second thing is about modern city planning and town planning, and typically the failures and a few successes, how that works. And then there's the model that Argo, my business, has developed, that we will be applying in Pakistan, just outside of Islamabad. And then the fourth thing that I'd like to talk about is how does this actually work? Who generates, and how do cities get funded, and why does it happen? And so there's this sort of a background political, economic thing that underpins the whole thing. These things just don't appear out of thin air. So they're the 4 areas. And so the first one about how and why cities form, I find the most fascinating. I've done a fair bit of research into this historically. If anyone's interested, there's a book called Ekistics, Ekeistics, written by a Greek master planner, and it really underpins the nature of how humanity has settled over the millennia. And just to put it in a very brief format, humans work better in groups. We're not solitary beings, and so we tend to aggregate ourselves in groups. usually around families first. And so this has happened for so long in our history, literally hundreds of thousands of years, that it has invaded our DNA, or perhaps our DNA causes us to habitate in a very specific way, form habitations. And the first one is that pretty well all humans around the globe have the capacity to remember about 300 names. And so that would generally apply to all your immediate blood relations and your married relations and your cousins and your second cousins. And then you've got their spouses and their children. There you have 300, 350 people. We can remember that many names. And so that's considered your clan. And so for millennia, we used to form villages based on blood relations, and it wasn't sensible or done to marry inside your clan. You had to go to another village to find a mate and then you start again. So this is about keeping the bloodlines clear genetically. So that's a very important number, 300 to 350 names you can remember, because it does define our immediate extended family. Okay. In modern times, with devices like Zoom on the internet, telephones, of course, and motor vehicles and aeroplanes, our clans are not geophysically located around us like they have been historically. And so we tend to have clans of about the same number. So if you all imagine yourself, how many people do you correspond with closely? And it doesn't necessarily, on a weekly basis, say, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're related by blood or marriage, but you'll have 300 or 350 people who you know, who you like to keep in contact with from time to time, or you are in contact with regularly. And so this is a very important number in our DNA that creates this part of our DNA that creates this clan number. And the next number, and so if you're going to create a village, that's a very good number to have, because if you can remember everyone's name, you're safer. You know immediately who the stranger is. Like, who are you? I don't know. What's your name? And you can approach everyone on that basis. How, in Australia, we raise our hand up to acknowledge someone as we're driving by in our village, if it's outback particularly, or g'day mate, you say this. The next genetic marker is that our brains can remember about 1,200 faces. So facial recognition ends at about 1,200. And so 1,200 represents the maximum size the community should be, can stretch to 1,500. And what I like about this number is it has defined proper villages on every continent in every age, that all the enduring small townships and villages have been 12 to 1,500 people. It seems to be when they get to 3,000 people that you start to not remember, you can't recognize the people. And so the stranger element comes in, and then you have the breakdown of the social cohesion. So while you can walk through your own township and you may not remember their name, but you can recognize the face, you can go, hello, g'day, mate. And so there's the cohesion of the community. And so people tend to behave themselves socially a lot more if they know they're recognized by everyone around them, because they have standing in the community, and you have to build standing. It's a natural thing that humans do. Unless you've lost a bolt, in which case you need to be looked after. So what I find is that we can probably stretch this number to about 2,000, because usually if you're walking down the street, so that's kind of the legal limit, if you want to put it that way. When you're walking down the street, you might be with someone and you see someone you don't know. You can turn to the person beside you and say, do you know who that is? And they'll go, oh, yes, that's so-and-so's cousin. And you go, okay, and you can pass on and say hello. So that this cohesion of a community is incredibly important. When you lose cohesion, you get to 3,000 people or more, you stop acknowledging people in the street. Now, you would know this from, I haven't even spent a huge amount of time in Pakistan, let alone in villages in Pakistan. I bet you anything everyone acknowledges each other in villages. But in Karachi, Johor and Islamabad, you don't say hello to everyone you walk by. No, it's too big, so you let go. And at that moment, you get a lot of aberration in the community. You get petty crime, you get vandalism, you get graffiti, you get a whole bunch of stuff. Traditionally, I don't know how well behaved Pakistani population is. Certainly in Australia, when people get naughty, they do lots of petty things. They're nicking people's bags and damaging things, it's graffiti particularly. And so, and there's a thing that goes hand in hand with it. This is not just, well, there's only a certain number of people who, when they're not recognised or being supervised, will become, let's call it naughty or antisocial. There's a thing about compaction, which I've spoken about before. When you get too many people living in too small an area, people get a bit antsy. They get a bit overexcited and irritated, and so that doesn't help the situation either. It's better if people are calmer. So these two numbers, 300 and 1,200, very important for us for city planning, because when we build a city and say it has, say, 125,000 people in it, like the project that we're working on outside of Islamabad, it's broken down into villages of 1,500, which in turn are broken down into cells of about 350 people. So I'm talking people, not talking households or houses. Okay. So if you can maintain these discrete groups, even within a city, you maintain the sanity and you can maintain ownership of a region by a group of people or a township or a village. As soon as it's lost and all the borders are merged and no one can recognise anyone, that's when the society breaks down and you get all the trouble and you need big police forces and it gets out of control. So I just find that that's a fascinating formation, how it works. I want to stress to you that cities form, you could argue for energetic reasons. I've got this great belief that everything will devolve back to the fact that we're electric beings, if you understand your quantum theory. We're not really here, we're just holograms of a bunch of electrons flowing around. And our eyes are nicely designed bits of holographic equipment that create an image that our brain can understand. And that's the current understanding scientifically. It sounds a little bit weird, but everything will come back to an electric basis. And so it's very interesting to assess how towns and cities form on the basis of the kilojoules that are required to make them operate. And there's two examples that I always like to bring up. First one I'll just go through very briefly, and that's Rome. So Rome was the largest ancient city ever. It had a population of 1 million humans. And it survived. Okay, so to feed 1 million humans, you can't do it in the adjacent area within travelling distance. And so to feed them, feed all the people in Rome, many of whom were bureaucrats or they were artisans or making things for export. They're in judiciary, they're in, the armed forces. They had to have their food imported, and sometimes the food came in from thousands of kilometres away on drays pulled by bullocks. And so that's and so Rome had to keep growing in order to feed itself. It kind of ended up being a model that couldn't stabilise. So the bigger they got, the further out they had to go to get food. And so the Roman Empire expanded. And it was such a good workable model that it did that. So there was actually an anthropologist who literally worked out as accurately as they could how many kilojoules it took to build the Colosseum. And that included, bringing the stone in and how many kilojoules a bullock would expend in an hour or a day, and how much food it needed to eat, and where the hay came from, and the people involved in the building had to eat food. And they built this huge model of the kilojoules. It's an insane number of kilojoules. You could It's like a nuclear power plant was required to build the Colosseum, and so eventually, and there are a few reasons out there why Rome finally collapsed, which it did, whether they were spiritual or political or health issues or whatever. But I strongly believe that the main reason that Rome collapsed was it couldn't maintain the model, and eventually it had to collapse because it couldn't support the energetic requirements that it had. And then the other model that I like to discuss is the other end of the scale. So these models are pre-industrial revolution. So we're talking 18th century, and this other model is a family unit. It's in Great Britain somewhere, and again, it was a study done by an anthropologist about how much energy expenditure was required to maintain a family in a village. It was an agricultural village. Well, all villages were agricultural, I should say. This family were in agriculture. They were growing food for the village. And the family consisted of 10 people. It was mum and dad. I'm going to count my fingers. Mum and dad. There was grandmother and grandfather. There was an unmarried sister, and there were 5 children. Okay, that was a standard family, pretty well say, in those days. And so the family's enterprise consisted of growing food. So they had to seed the crop, they had to harvest the crop, and they had to sell the crop. And so it took them 44 person days. So this is 4 people, 11 days to do those activities every year. Now that's all they had to do to generate enough income to buy everything they needed, all the other foodstuffs, pots, pans, mats, whatever you like, to survive for an entire year. So a family of 10 expended 44 person days to survive. Now, I like to contrast that to an average Australian family, and you might consider Australia to be your nominal Western advanced civilization. These figures are freely available. They may not be spot on because they shift all the time, and I'm probably remembering them from a decade ago, but it's all pretty similar. The average Australian family is 2.25 people. I think it might even be less than that now, but say 2.25 people. So it's 2 adults, and you've got a 25% chance of having a child, 1 child, right, at the time. And a lot of families in Australia are single parent families. So you've got a mother and a father and a child, or, yeah. So, and the situation in Australia is that we require immigrants to maintain population level, because if we don't, our population just dives, because we're not producing 2 children out of every family. You get that? So if everyone in Australia stopped having children, Australia's population would be 0 in 85 years. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? That can happen anywhere in the world. So in Australia, you've got an average family of 2.25. Let's call it 2.5, because that makes the maths easier for me, because it's a quarter of the British pre-industrial revolution family. And an average working year in Australia is 222 days. That's when you take out annual leave, public holidays and weekends. And in Australia, on average, 1.5 adults is your annual equal equivalent income. So that's 333 working days an average Australian family has to do to support 2.25 people. Contrast that to 44 days for 10 people. And the factoring is just insane. And so when I did that comparison in my head after reading this anthropological document, I thought that's just nuts. How have we got this so badly wrong, that we now all have to work like slaves to support us? And I'm thinking, okay, so we have 2-car garages, we all have en suites and, you know, spa, swimming pools and, you know, and entertainment systems and big plasma TVs, and that's all energy consumptive, of course, and it's nice. But how, having that, can you justify the extra expenditure of energy that we have to make to enjoy that lifestyle? So our lifestyle is pretty sophisticated, but is it worth, I don't know what the maths is. It's 4 times, what's 44 into 333, guys? I've got a calculator. I'll just do this, because this figure, whenever I hear it, I just go, that can't be true. So 333 working days in Australia divided by 44 for the farmers is 7.5.
6.9.
I got a different figure.
6.9.
333 divided by 44 equals 7.56. Yeah. Times a factor of 4, because there's 4 times as many of the pre-industrial revolution families there are of Australian current family. So my family has to expend 30 times more energy to survive than a pre-industrial revolution family in Europe, right? Or Great Britain in this instance. And so 30 times, that's just unbelievable figure. Okay, so I'm thinking, why is that so? And can we bring back the good old days? And in English, in Old English, it's still used a little bit. There's a term called a bucolic life, B-U-C-O-L-I-C. And bucolic is a great old word. It means, it doesn't sound like, it sounds like a disease, but it's not. A bucolic life is a life of ease and plenty and leisure. Okay. And because no one has that anymore, the word's fallen out of favour, I'm sure. But so how do you design? And as a master planner, I'm thinking, why have communities devolved so badly? And what can you do to create a life of ease and leisure and plenty again? And so that comes down to the Argo model, and I will speak about that later. But I just wanted to highlight that this is a really important part, the energetic consumption of how townships form and why, and why the groupings occur. Okay, so that's the first part that I want to talk about, gentlemen. The second bit, modern cities, modern city planning, is in contrast to how we're doing things now, because you have to do it wrong for 50 or 100 years before you work it out, and that's what's been going on. And then you've got to sit back and go, this is not working. Are we stupid, or will we do it again? Doing it the same way again will just create the same problem. So why are we doing this? This is the sort of overarching thought. So the modern city planning, I guess that Greek master planner or town planner, his name is Doxiadis, Doxiadis, I think, Doxiadis, if anyone wants to look him up. And his book is called Ekistics. He coined the term. It's a Greek word for human settlement. So, and I guess he's one of my heroes because he goes back to the basics. So modern. Sorry?
What's the Greek term again, please?
Ekistics. E-K-I-S-T-I-C. Ekistics, or kistical study, ekistics. Okay. So I guess where modern city planning took off was with the advent of the motor vehicle. And because most of the cities and townships prior to that followed the village format pretty closely. And these are still truly evident across Europe, because, the towns, and particularly the medieval fortress towns on hills, they all behave around the format that we're discussing. They're all 12 to 1,500 occupants. They all knew each other well. They recognised everyone. And they're all based on family clans. And all you have to do is read Romeo and Juliet to know that there are clans inside villages. Okay. I think, when the car was invented, a few things happened. When you make petroleum for cars, you have a byproduct, and it's called bitumen. And bitumen is incredibly toxic. And then a very smart Scotsman, whose name was McAdam, discovered that it makes great roads. And if you can bind it up with pebbles and other things and lay it on the road, this toxic substance is effectively not neutralized, but say put out of the way, out of harm. Okay. And so probably I should tell everyone that it's really dangerous to lick a road because it's very toxic. I know that no one licks roads, but I'm just putting it that way so you understand. This is the plutonium of the last century. Okay. So they got rid of that whole problem of what to do with the byproduct of petrol, that you need to have cars, and so they made roads. So making roads became a real thing, and the industry of road making became very powerful, and particularly in town planning measures, and they ran their own workshops on how to plan a city. And so particularly in America, this is, I would say, almost entirely in America, this started. And the town planning, which was at the time a two-dimensional event. Today it's four-dimensional, so we don't just look at a map with different coloured areas, we look at height as well, and we look at the progress of a city over its life and into the next life, and can it be sustainable, does it cycle or whatever. So what happens is that they set up this model where everyone lived in these dormitory suburbs. We live here. It's lovely. Everyone has gardens. You've all got space, safety in numbers. You might have a little corner shop, but everyone lives here. And then over here, 20 kilometres away, this is where everyone works. Mm. Okay? So you have to get in your car to go to work. And so there's your light industry, your commerce, your retail. And then down here, on the third leg of the triangle, this is where everyone does their recreation and possibly their shopping. It can be a fourth part to it, where your retail is separated from your leisure. And so you've got to drive there if you want to play golf, if you want to see a movie, if you want to buy your food. Now, these three things we all need to do to live in society. And so whereas our pre-industrial revolution family lived where they worked, where they ate, and where they recreated, now you've got to travel 60 kilometres at least to get what you need. And so thereby using the car and using petroleum. And so the cities could be very large, because if you separate these usable parts by 20 kilometres or even 10, you can imagine the size of these conurbations that created. And it was, and then you get ring roads, right, linking these up. And then when these became big enough, they'd form a central core, which would become the CBD, the central business district. And then so a lot of people would work there, but if they wanted to recreate or buy food, they still had to disappear. And then what happened was the suburban districts would fill up, and they'd have to duplicate, and they'd pop up in other areas, but they'd still be isolated, and they'd still be discrete residential zones only. Every now and again, so that was the original model, and it was completely damaged, totally changed life. We spent a lot of our life then commuting instead of being with family, and we had all this extra expense in the vehicle and the operation of it. So, you know, it was a broken model from day one, and yet it prospered, and it was spread all over the planet. Goodness knows how many cities in Australia are based on that model. And then they started mucking with it and making it better. And so, you know, we call this here putting lipstick on the pig. It's still a pig. It might look a bit better, but you can't fix the damaged model by just sort of prettying up the edges. So things like putting a golf course in the residential areas so that you could, so you had communities that were wrapped around golf courses. They had a lovely view, and if you played golf, well, that was a huge bonus. You could just walk out your backyard into the golf course. So little adjustments like this happened. Ring roads became a thing so that you get around the city quicker. And I'll just flick back to the pre-industrial revolution township equivalent. You lived upstairs, you did your work downstairs. It was your shop if you were a blacksmith or a retailer of some sort, and your town square and the village was where everything happened. So it was you didn't need a vehicle. Everything you needed was within walking distance. Yeah. Okay, so that's the, what I describe as a failed system. And then it got to the point where, in these big cities, the social problems, the social disruption and the failure, the breakdowns of society started to really occur, and you end up with slum areas, ghettos. And these are usually a factor of the lamination of society. So in a village, everyone lived together. There was the baron, where he might have lived on the hill slightly or in the castle, but all of the farmers lived at the periphery because they walked straight out in their farms. The retailers, the clergymen, everyone, everyone was there. You knew everyone. It was homogenous. From the village idiot, everyone knew who he was. Everyone looked after him because he knew he wasn't right in the head. It was all together as a very functional society, okay? But now what we're doing is we're stratifying it, and it got worse because the poor people lived in that urban area, suburban area. And the rich people, they lived in this suburban area. And in between, it laminated, it layered itself out. And so it's okay if you're rich and you've got the means to get around and to entertain yourself and travel and all this. But if you're poor and you don't have the money for all the transport, then you create urban slums. And this is what happens in conurbations that are built on this system. And so there's a real measurable degradation. And then what happens is that these people can't afford their own homes, and so they're stripped homeless. And so the government steps in and does cheap housing, housing for the poor, whatever you want to call it, affordable housing. It's got many names. And so these are the minimum and often less than minimum solutions. And as we've discussed in a previous conversation, there's a certain amount of space that every family needs to have before they start eating each other, and it gets difficult and their family degrades. So the social housing tended to be too small, and everyone's poor, and there aren't enough services in there, and so they don't have leisure and recreation like you might have in a more wealthy area, and so that whole community starts to spiral down. And so then depression starts to rise, medication goes through the roof, self-medication goes through the roof, which leads to addiction, whether it's pills or alcohol, hard drugs. These things, so you can see how it breaks apart because of the lamination. And this is all caused by bad master planning. Okay. And so my argument is here, don't laminate a society. You distribute the poor people equitably through the whole region, along with the wealthy and the middle class, because everyone can aspire then to rise up in the community and not be stigmatized by having come from there or there, the bad areas. So, which creates more of a barrier for them to jump in socio-economic status. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not purporting communism by any stretch, so don't get me wrong on this. This is capitalism 101 is what I'm discussing. Everyone has an opportunity to do better. and if they do, excuse me, what happens is that they do better. It's just natural. People want to achieve. If you give them an opportunity, they will take it. Now, notwithstanding, there's a resilient 2 to 4% of any community who are not capable of lifting themselves up. They're damaged in some way, maybe physically or mentally, or socially, had some stuff they can't deal with. Returned war veterans are often damaged. They can't function normally. They need lots of medication, and even then they can't function. So that bit of community must be looked after by the rest. So that's an exception, and a good community can always be measured by how they look after their oldest and their poorest. Okay. But as I said, with modern planning, it laminates into all the different strata, and you create these ghettos. So I think that's probably enough on how planning has ruined our lives. Don't you agree? So I'd like to talk about
just relating it back to some of the village life in Pakistan. Very similar, everybody in the village knows everybody. Everybody, you have the village elders who sort of control the goings on within the village. And then as progress happens, people are having to move to the cities for education, for jobs, for healthcare. And, there is this a vacuum left from the villages. It's a real problem. It's a real social problem within the village communities in Pakistan. Zubi would probably add more to it because obviously being in Pakistan, but I've seen all this part of the development that's going on there as well.
Well, firstly, I would say this is a clever bit of work that you've done. This is genius. Why? Because the stats that you've put, they are so beautifully designed and placed in terms of the village factor that you've added. Because a few years ago, I had to actually, as a consultant, design a project for the government.
You're on. We can't hear
You're on
you.
mute. Yeah, you've gone on to mute.
Hello?
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry. So a while ago, I was involved in designing a project for the government of Pakistan where we had to install a system of supply clean and safe drinking water to the smallest villages of the Punjab province of Pakistan. And amazingly, the smallest villages that they were picking out for these pilot projects were having populations down to 250 people. And there were 32,000 of these villages in Punjab province alone that they were targeting. So and it's so amazing because when I personally went to say 100 or 200 of those villages, because we had to have certain site surveys of in certain cases where there were certain systems already installed in the previous governments, but they were dysfunctional because of various reasons. So when I used to go there during the survey, it is so true that everybody knew everybody over there. Because there were a max of 250 to 300 people. And I mean, it was like you're meeting one giant family and they know everybody. And the way they were welcoming me, I had the same welcome in every corner of that village. And when I would say to them that, okay, I met this Mr. X in that area, he was like, "Oh yeah, he's that guy's cousin, that guy's relative, this guy's that," and then I'm like, "Okay," and because we had stats, we had data to support which year which equipment was imported from which part of the country and blah blah blah, and they knew exactly at what time which person from which part of the country brought what sort of an equipment and why it's not working, although it was at least 3 to 4 kilometers away from that person's house, but he knew exactly what was going on. So while you were mentioning this concept of 300 names that a person generally remembers and 1,200 faces you can store in your memory, it is so beautifully designed, I would say. But when you added the element of energy, of how many kilojoules it requires for a system like this to operate, that actually made it more interesting for a person like me. Why? Because yes, okay, you can calculate how much of energy is required to run a system like this, but what is the source of producing that or generating that energy to keep that system alive? I mean, other than the natural resources, if we are to make a superficial model of some sort in a hypothesis right now, how would we say that we go to an area in Pakistan which is not very fertile, or I would say it is it's barren land, but there are people.
Can I just butt in, because I just want to say, write this down. We can talk about a zero energy farm. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And everyone should do it, but no one thinks about it, but it's possible. And I'm saying, don't import pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer, don't import water. It's possible, and export all this food. And I can explain how that's done. And this is part of the model that we have. That's
Perfect.
key. It's about the energy. So when you break it down to where the energy is flowing, and you can resolve those equations, you know what that equals? Sustainability. That's true sustainability. Yeah. Sorry, mate, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to hold that thought, because that's something that we can talk about.
You got the question immediately, and I'm sure you have the answer to that, because when you were mentioning all this, my head was working around those things. That okay, if he has come down to this level, that he has calculated how many man hours are translated into how many kilojoules of energy, then he must have also come up with the answers to how to maintain that sort of an energy level in that village, a model village, I would say, and how is that sustainable, and how does it reciprocate in a way that we burn this much of energy or utilize this much of energy, and this much is reproduced somehow through the mechanism that
you know what's fascinating about that point is that, and it took me a while of pondering about that whole pre-industrial revolution farming family, comparing it to my family. It's sort of the penny dropped. I thought, if 10 of them are only working 44 man hours a year, what are they doing for the other 321 days in the year? What are they doing? I started looking into it. These people were amazing travelers. They would get on their feet or their horse, and they'd travel across to Europe and go to Rome, or all over the place, and they'd come back a year later. Or they would be fantastic storytellers. They played with their children. They passed on knowledge verbally.
I think that's why they had to actually do something productive.
Yeah. They learned swordsmanship.
Yeah, because we don't have time for any production anymore.
Yeah. Anyway, so okay. Good point. Will I move on to the Argo model?
Yep, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've been refining this model for 25 years, and I've got to say that we haven't built thousands of cities. We've built a couple, and some of them have half built, and then usually a war gets in the way, or currently COVID is stopping all our enterprise. But that gives us more time to polish the model a bit more. And so, if you're doing things, you can learn by action. But when you stopped from actually physically doing stuff, you have to sit back and use your brain and research and think a lot more. And then both processes are necessary: the physical learning and then the mental considerations. It's a balance. You've got to do both. I've probably had too much time thinking now. I really need to get out and do a city. But the Islamabad Global Leisure City, that's its working title. That's not going to be the name of the city. That's to be a horrendous name for a city. We should have a competition for the name for this city at some stage. But it's designed to hold 125,000 people. And the way to do this without disrupting an existing city like Islamabad is to create a satellite to the city, which is autonomous. So it doesn't drain the city of any of its resources, particularly not its manpower. Very important. And it must add to the value of the city. So I think this all came about, Raza, correct me if I'm wrong, but when Prime Minister Imran Khan put out a call that there was a need to house 5 million Pakistani families. Yeah? That's a significant number of people. And again, I've mentioned this before, and it just boggles my mind. 5 million people, if there's 5 people in every family, which is probably at least the number of people in a family in Pakistan, would I be right? 5 to 7?
Yeah, at least minimum.
Yeah. Well, 5 million families times 5 in a family is 25 million people. There is the population of Australia. And it's just like, how do you fix a problem that big? You know, it's a big problem. Now, it can be fixed. So we went away. We're problem solvers. And we went, how do you do that? And we worked our model and went, yes, if you do it 86 times, you've got it solved, right? And that's possible. It's just money. But there's a call to take people who are in inappropriate accommodation at the moment, and that would vary from shanty towns made out of found materials that are unfit for habitation. They're not fire safe. They probably leach water every time it rains, and so everyone's getting diseases from dampness, and there might be bugs and cockroaches and rats getting around us. So that's the worst end of it. And these locations are usually in areas that flood regularly every time it storms. They might be in drains or river edges or surge areas on the edge of oceans or seas. To as best as a family loses their home and the brother reaches out and says, you can live with us until it sorts out. So you end up with 2 families living under one home, under one roof, okay, which is better than a shanty town, but it creates the same problems of compaction. So you've got too many people living under too small an area, which we've spoken about before. And that leads to a whole lot of social degradation. We won't cover that area now, but it's inappropriate, doesn't work, and so it has to be resolved. So we, my recollection again, Raza, is we reached back out and said, this is to the Prime Minister, this is how you house 5 million people, 5 million families, and we want to do it. I think you came back with the thing like, you're not the only person wanting to help. You want to cut it back a bit. And so why don't we start with, say, forget the figure now, like 100,000 homes.
100,000 was the figure, yeah.
Was 100? And
100,
which
yeah.
You'll notice I've cleverly fudged up to 125. Because it's always good to upsell things, but it's a better number than 100 for a city, in my opinion. So with a view to doing a working model as a pilot to prove itself so that then the government would have confidence to replicate it. and replicated and replicated and eventually solve the problem. Now, I'm quite confident that our model is so excellent that other people trying models everywhere will fail for the same reasons they've failed for the last 50 years, that we don't need to worry about being the first or the last. Let's just do our thing, create the working model that everyone knows works and actually does work, and then that'll be the model that naturally wins. So this is like natural selection of the master planners. The best one will just keep replicating itself and the others will die naturally. So, and I know there are a lot of people interested in helping with this problem, and that's good. And I hope that there are other successes, but from what I can see around the planet, particularly in China with all their new green cities, they're all going to fail for the reasons that I've already run over. You can't just grow trees on roofs and collect water off roofs and call yourself a green city. That's not how it works at all. It's not a sustainable city. Might be green, might look green from a distance, but it's not sustainable. Okay, so our model starts with, as I outlined before, the 300 and the 1200 figures. And so you start off with a village of 1200. And so I like to consider this like a flower. So in the middle is what the Greeks called an agora. This is the village square. Village green in Britain, piazza in Italy. They've been happening for millennia. So the center of the village is a meeting place, and it's where all the important things happen, where people stand up on a box and talk politics and try and attract attention, or they talk religion, or you'll find that the place of worship is on the village square always. That's an indicator that it's the village square. It's a place where people can congregate in numbers. It's the political space, it's the religious space, it's where you buy your food. So the green market is there, the wet market, the fish market, it's all there. The retailers, your baker, your butcher, your candlestick maker, they're all there, the blacksmith. So the village centre is where everything that you need on a day-to-day basis can be found. You go there, one spot. So the importance of this is that the distance from that centre point to where you live can't exceed a normal walking distance. And so you could argue that that would be a kilometre, but that's only okay for fit young fellas like all of us, right? If you're old or you're a child being said to go down and buy a grocery that's been missing for the night's dinner, you'd have to limit to about 400 metres. And again, and it depends on topography and climate, but 400 metres is a good parameter. And we've discussed this before again, as I say. And so that means that your village is 800 metres across. You can walk wherever you need. You don't have to jump in a car to do anything, and that's a huge saving. Now, in Australia, the average car ownership is at least 2 cars per family. It's probably more like 3.5 cars once the kids living at home have cars and, it gets out of control. So a 2-car garage is never enough these days. You always have a 3rd car parked somewhere else. Okay, so let's just pretend we're a 2-car family. The 2 money earners have a car. The kids have to walk it or catch the bus. If all the groceries and things that you need are within walking distance of your home, there's 1 car you don't need. Or alternatively, if your place of work is within walking distance, there's 1 car you don't need. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you go entirely carless, though that's a possibility in a village. But I don't want everyone to become medieval about this. We still have modern society. I might need to buy a widget that's 200 kilometres away for this fandangle thing that I'm trying to make here. And of course, it's not made in my village, so I've got to get in a car to go and get it, right? So you need cars. Or you might want to go to the beach, which is 100 kilometres away, or a theme park, or something that won't be in your village, right? So 1 car is necessary, but if you take 1 car out of the equation, that represents generically about 15 to 20% of the cost of the family economy. So if you reduced your outgoings by 10 to 15%, and I'm talking fuel, the car, the value of the car, paying off the car, the registration, the maintenance, all these things. Yeah, consumables. Okay, so I'll just take your mind back to why we work 30 times as hard as the guys back then did. This is one of the things to do. We take that out. If your farms, okay, so when you're in this village, if the people who grow the food live at the edge of the village and walk straight out into their farm, their farming costs are reduced immediately because they don't have vehicles. And they walk into the fields and they walk back out with their produce. They may have a tractor, perfectly fine, but they don't need all these vehicles. Okay, so they can produce the food more cheaply. Now, there's a donut around the village of farmland that will feed the village of 1,200-1,500 people. That food comes in directly off the field into the marketplace and can be sold the same day or the next day. You don't have to have lots of refrigeration, and you're not burning diesel, moving it in trucks from A to B to C through distributors, and essentially you're going from the farmer to the retailer, and the distribution network in the middle who are taking percentages are eliminated. And so the analysis has come in, and food can be 25% the cost of what we pay for food now under a normal distribution system. But let's just say it's half, right? So most people will spend about 1/4 to 1/3 of their gross income on food. So I'm talking average communities in a developed country. So we've taken another, say, 15% off the cost of living. So now we've knocked nearly 1/3 off our outgoings, okay? There are a few other smaller things, and I won't load us up now with that because it's unnecessary, but a few more things like that means that we get to 1/2 of our outgoings are eliminated because you planned the city right. So if your outgoings are 1/2 and you have a debt, like a mortgage on a home, then you've got two choices. You can pay the debt off twice as fast, or you can work half as hard. Most people don't give up their jobs. They keep working hard. They pay off the debt quickly. So instead of a 30 or 35-year mortgage, and it doesn't work out being half because of the way compounding interest works, they've paid off their house in 7 to 10 years. Because the extra money that they now have, because they're not spending it on items like that car and the extra cost of food, it goes all into the debt. They get debt-free very quickly. Then guess what? The debt represented 1/4 of the family's outgoings. So now you've lost another 1/4. So now we're operating on 1/4 of what we were operating on as terms of outgoings. And we haven't changed our income system at all. You see the power of this, the impact this has? So if you design a city in that way, that you reduce everyone's outgoings, suddenly people stop surviving. They start thriving. Very, very important. And this is about the energy again. We measure the energy with dollars, but it's all about the energy, okay? So if you energetically design a city to be a minimum kilojoules, you'll naturally get a thriving community, okay? So I think, so you're starting to understand this. We've got this village of 1,500 people, and it's made up of a cluster of petals of the family clans that are around it. So you've got 300, 300, 300, 300, 300, 300, 5 times. Around it, Agora, there's your village. Very simple. And so the farmers live on the periphery. The commercial and retailers, they live in the middle, and all the support people in religion and government, they're in the middle, and everyone in between. And so you have to create a situation where you've got landed houses for the farmers with barns and livestock. Then you come in, you have the next thing is you might have small lots or 800 square metre lots or whatever, with a house on it, and then you go to townhouses, and then you go to low rise, and then you go to medium rise. Okay, so that's how you could manage that many people. So you don't even go medium rise with 1,500 people. You can run that all in an 800-meter diameter circle, excluding the farm. I'm just talking the built-up areas. You can run all of that and not go over 3 stories. So you know what? You don't own one lift. You can walk up. Ground floor, first floor, second floor, 3 levels. You can do all of that. And so what happens in the middle of the city, where you've got your square and your places of worship and your food, all the retailers on the ground floor spilling out al fresco with bistro seating and everything. Above that is usually your commerce. So this is your accountants and your architects and your lawyers. They don't need street frontage, but they need to be in the centre for access to all the people. And then on top of that, that's where they live. That's valuable real estate there, but they live in the penthouse, top floor, 3rd level. And then behind that, you've got very nice medium-rise houses. And again, you'd have retail at the bottom, because the ring outside the main ring is a street that wraps around, and retail on both sides, commerce again, and residential. And then you get more and more residential as you get further away from the centre. So the model is very simple. And you know what? I didn't invent that. I just walked through Europe and China and Africa and Asia. I saw that model everywhere I went. And they're always hundreds of years old. And so, how dopey are we that we broke such a beautiful model? Now, when I was describing that to you the first time, were you thinking of a contemporary city? Or are you thinking about a medieval village? You're thinking about a contemporary city designed this way, yeah? So it's not the architecture I'm talking about. I'm talking about the model, the planning model. These can be super contemporary dwellings and shops. And, could be any very modern place. So the architecture is a total different story. In my opinion, it should be wedded to the climate and the available materials, and and how people live, the customs and the culture. But that's the architectural aspect. The planning model, I think, is kind of set in time, and it's set in our DNA, the way we want to operate, and the way that humans thrive best. Okay, so our model, when you take those villages and then you run them in a cluster, so you have 5 of those, you've got 7,500 people now who all have their own villages, and they're clustered around a little CBD. So this is your town, this is a township. See how the model's growing? It's a fractal geometry. And as you possibly know, if you're into nature, everything operates on fractal geometries. And you know what? So does human settlement. You look historically back and you look at the way from the air, how humans settle. The closest thing that you can say is that it looks like it was an organic growth. A lot of people parallel human settlement to viruses because they look remarkably like how a virus spreads. But I would suggest it's more like a fern, or it'd be some nice organic thing. I don't like, stomping on humanity. I think we do a great job despite some failures. So the organic nature of the way we grow, it actually lives in our genes and the way we like to habitate. So if there wasn't a master planner involved and you weren't building it all in one hit, it would grow that way if you didn't have a car. It's the main point. You take the car out of the equation, we go back to the way we lived for millennia, and that's how we don't go crazy. That's sustainability. You bring the car in, and suddenly it allows you to do things that are unnatural. We get divorced from our family. I mean, physically spaced, not legally. Everything, and you put your parents in a retirement village, so you don't see them. Don't get me started on this. You take the grandparents out of a family unit, all your childcare disappears. The birthing mother gets postnatal depression, which becomes long-term postnatal depression, which ruins the family. The father becomes an alcoholic. Children are latchkey. They go berserk. The police are bringing them home at night. That's social degradation. only because you took your grandparents and you put them over there and said, you have a nice time, look after yourself, we'll see you twice a year, your birthday and Christmas. Will that do? That's a social disaster. Okay, so our model occurs like that, and then when you take a township, which is another leaf, at that point you must surround it with a green belt. You must, and that's where your playing fields are. I would suggest that cricket fields are probably the most curative thing you could build in Pakistan. Everyone will play cricket. The big green spaces, you can socialise, do team play, and it's a lung. All that grass growing will create a certain amount of oxygen. And then beyond that, you need forestry, you need parkland, like botanic gardens, in which you sprinkle streams and bridges and bistro cafes, ice cream parlours, juice bars. That's where people will move out to have their weekend recreation. You need these recreation areas, amphitheatres, live concerts, basketball courts, football, whatever. It's all in this ring around the outside. Golf courses can wrap around there. And then you take that and then you replicate it and you replicate it and you replicate it again in a ring. And in the centre of that ring is your CBD. And that's where you have your major sporting facility. So international accredited aquatic centre, stadium for 100,000 people, all that stuff. Indoor courts, that's all in the middle with your university. So there are places of learning in the townships. So they've got schools and colleges and things, but the universities are in the CBD. They're in that central area. The major hospitals, and each of the smaller fractals also have everything from medical centres to small surgeries, but the major hospitals in the middle. And so all of these big functions occur. The political centre is there, your operations, the Lord Mayor sits there with all the people who look after the city function. So does that model come across? Do you understand how that model works? It's kind of almost banal. I feel stupid even trying to describe it because it's so obvious now, isn't it? Like how else would you do it? And at any time, anyone can walk to get everything they need. This is the beauty of it. It's so functional. And yet, if you want to get involved at a higher level, you can get to the CBD, you can. So, and there was all the green things that you can build into this. So we're always thinking all the time, have we got enough biomass to create enough oxygen for the population? Just think about that. You can calculate it. How many trees do you need to create oxygen for you to breathe? So we can work that out, and this is what green rings are for. Because on the outside of this are the farmlands, and so they surround it in the final donut. And there's your satellite city. So it's food secure, create all its own food. And I'll explain to you how the farmers don't have to import fertilizer, pesticide, or herbicide. It's a very elegant system in its own right. It's energy neutral, and there are ways that we do this. So in terms of energy, we look at using so a lot of people fall back to solar collectors on the roof, the solar panels, and they're really not that efficient and shouldn't be promoted. I'm going to get shot now by 1,000 different arrows, having said that. But they're not energy efficient. When it costs you more in water and electricity to make the solar panel than that solar panel will ever make in its life, don't tell me it's sustainable or green. It's pretty simple. Pretty simple. Now, having said that, there's a new generation of solar coming through. It's called thin film solar. That's sustainable. Try getting some. It's not easy. Okay, so our fallback is to take the waste from a community, so all the municipal waste, everything, and pyrolyze it. And what we found is that in a developed country, the amount of waste is more than in undeveloped countries because people tend to upcycle and recycle at their own home, whereas here everything just gets chucked out the door, you know. So in a developed country, if we take all our waste and turn it into biodiesel, we can run turbines to create electricity to power up more than half the city. It's an elegant solution for half your power. And then we have other technologies, which we may talk about later, which can amplify the electricity. I can hear the wires running hot now. What does he mean by amplify? How do you amplify electricity? There are technologies we're working with at the moment. We'll take 1 kilowatt.
Technology to a different program, Will.
Yeah, yes, we must take 1 kilowatt and amplify it to 4. So, you know, suddenly we're exporting power because we've designed it to do so. And the problem with most modern cities is that they're just grasping at straws and looking ad hoc at different things that don't. So you've got to look at the whole thing as an integrated plan, hence the term master planning. If you just ad hoc it, you're going to get a very ad hoc solution. Okay, so energy can be neutralized, water, the same. And so we discussed previously ionic wind generators, or e-forests as we call them. We can attract all the water we need through the atmosphere towards the city to land on the farm or in our water catchment areas. And that's more than enough water to feed a city of 125,000 people, more than enough. We can manipulate the water from freely. Well, it's not free. The manipulation costs a bit of money, but it's relatively cheap. We can manipulate the water towards the township, and then the water is nominally free at that point, because once you've trapped the water into the cycle, and this is the beauty of water, you can't destroy it. You can change its state, but if we've got enough gigalitres in a city for all the functions of a city, then it's not likely to leave you. And so long as you can keep accessing that same water, you don't have to import any more water through the atmosphere. However, it will happen anyway, because when you have enough water in the atmosphere and the ground and your biomass, you create a bubble over your city of temperature that is lower than the air around the city. And the natural laws of the universe say that if water vapor out here floating around will always move towards the colder zone. So if your zone is cold because of the evaporative transpiration that's occurring out of the leaves in your biomass, then any moisture within 80 or 100 kilometres of your township is going to end up on your township, giving you a bit of a rain shower in the afternoon, or appearing at 3 a.m. as dew on the ground, irrigating everything. So significant amounts of water. So suddenly you've created a perpetual motion machine with the water cycle in your city. And so suddenly you're not water poor anymore. And so you can have lakes, you can have rivers, and it can be a little bit wasteful, doesn't matter. Because where that water goes, it's being trapped by the temperature gradient that you've created over your cool city. So I think you should see, this is a better name than Green City. I think they should be called Cool Cities. You can make that what you will. So these things are important to create a city. Now, the satellite city that we're proposing of Islamabad is linked to Islamabad, because starting a city is always a hard task. You can't just build it and they will come. That's the hope, but it doesn't happen like that. The people who we're trying to attract are the people without homes in Islamabad, who are inappropriately housed. But we don't just want them, because we can't have just all the poor people, the bottom end of the socioeconomic scale. That's lamination again, and we'd have a ghetto and we'd have a failure. So there's the city being linked with a high-speed connection. So with our case, it's an overhead monorail system that at peak speed can go 500 kilometres now, though we don't have the distance to get that speed up. But at 30 kilometre distance from the CBD of Islamabad, we can get into the city in 10 minutes with no stops. So that's easier than most commutes. So you get on a train station and suddenly at the satellite city you get off. So the importance of this is that you can live in Islamabad and still work in the global leisure city, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. Or you can live in the satellite city and still go home every evening, commute, or visit or visit your family on the weekend. So you're not divorced from everyone. It's a very simple trip. With our plan, our intention is to link up the international airport in Islamabad in a triangle, so that we have that connection as well, because we see that international connection for what we're doing. And so additional to the standard Argo planning model, and this is where we're very blessed to get approval from Raza, who was tasked with creating a media city. How would you call it? Film city, Raza? What do you call your initiative?
Yeah, it's part of the whole leisure city, global leisure city facility that we have the media city within the international media city, creating jobs, creating a theme to it. Part of the film city within there as well. And then the whole conference facilities, the water theme park. So there's a whole master plan, as Will's alluded to.
So that model that Raza has been tasked to do wants to bring about for Pakistan. We embrace that in our CBD. So it becomes our core facilities for leisure, recreation, and also employment. Significant amount of employment in these convention centres and film cities and leisure parks. We've built the CBD around that. So if you can imagine, our CBD is made up of three clover leaves, and built around that is the CBD, and around that is a green ring. So we can't expand the CBD. It's got to work inside that size, and there's a logic to this. I'll come back to that. The green ring is where all the cricket fields, not all, but a lot of cricket fields and urban parkland and recreational spaces are. Lakes and amphitheatres, golf courses, they live there. And then we break into our model around the outside where all the townships are that have their own centres. So the beauty of a circular model, and we don't expect that the model will look perfectly like a circle when it's done, because topography and water beds and rivers and things, they always get in the way. So we have to massage it around a bit. The idea of a circular model is that you can feed people into the CBD very, very quickly, very easily. So you have these radiating feeders, and then you have loops. So each township can be linked with high-speed rail or a bus system. It's very efficient. So no matter where you are, you can get to anywhere else in this town very quickly and economically on public transport. So this is intentional public transport, not public transport designed ad hoc over the top of the city that only partially works. This is the perfect transport system built into the geometry of the city, if you like, so, which will make it work. And if it works perfectly, I know there's no such thing as perfect, but if it works nearly perfectly, then it's going to run more efficiently and cost less to run. So all of these things play into the whole, modelling. I guess that's kind of the model. So this is a place where everyone can live. Everyone has an opportunity. It takes pressure off the homeless, off the government to deal with the homeless issue. And at the same time, we're not creating a slum or a low-cost housing development. We're creating a new city that will be vibrant, and everyone. So the people who are coming from the lower socioeconomic levels, as soon as they move into the city, they're employed. They've now jumped up to middle income. And so what? We fixed two problems: the housing.
The question that the audience will always ask, and people listening in, be it government people or whoever's listening into our model, is one of finance, and how is it going to all be put together? Because everything comes down to finance always. So, it's always about the dollar.
Thank you for the perfect segue. That's my last. That's the last thing I want to talk about, because of course that's perfect, lovely. Who's paying for this? It's like do that 86 times and see how poor you are. So these are financially self-sustaining models, and that's really the key. So there's lots of elegant bits to this, and I'll try and explain this to you. So we've spoken before about Jala, which was a microfinance system we set up initially for the Philippines for people in abject poverty who didn't have a bank account, right? And so we modified the model until it was big enough to handle them buying a 3-bedroom house in their lifetime. So over 30, 35 years, they could buy a 50 square metre 3-bedroom home. Not big, but certainly better than a tin can to live in, I can tell you. So we're lifting them up to a certain point, putting them in their own villages in the format that we've discussed, but in the cities where they were. So Jala creates an opportunity for them to borrow money. So we identify them first with Jala. So, okay, the banks won't acknowledge them, but Jala will, because they can build up identity using the Jala system. And when the identity is created, and it doesn't take a lot, but obviously we have to recognise who people are, so the debt that food can be nailed onto a real person, then Jala will step in with an algorithm that allows them to borrow. And the borrowings come from, we started off using cryptocurrency, or the model hasn't actually been turned on yet. We've been halted by COVID, but the idea is to take the money out of cryptocurrency accounts willingly. So people partner with us and say, yeah, sure, we'd like to help people in poverty. You can access our cryptocurrency so long as you pay us 1% interest and you guarantee that we'll get our money back, or we want 2% or 1.5%. So these are impact investors. They're not after 30% return on investment. That's a different group of people. We're not interested in them. And these are not donors, and we're not technically interested in them, though they're quite willing to put money into the system. But these are people who have the money sitting there and they want to earn, they don't want to lose in terms of inflationary losses, any money. They want to maybe accrue a little bit. And rather than just sitting there waiting for the market to lift, they'll allow it. They'll allow us to use it to build homes for people in poverty. So what we're doing is we're planning and building a city that will be paid for by the people who move in. And the model fits the people who have almost no money but are surviving through to very wealthy people. So even people with more money already have healthy jobs. They can still use the Jala system. Now, the Jala system is not usury. It's it doesn't charge compounding interest. It's just simple interest that covers the cost of operating the system. And so, you know, it usually works out about 5 or 6%, all the costs associated when you include the transfer fees that we have to get charged for going from our Jala accounting system to fiat currency. There's the insurances, there's the setup, there's the training. There have to be physical branches for people to access this and people to train them how to use it. So it operates in a sense like a credit union or a bank that needs personnel. So those costs can be captured around 5-6%. And at 5 or 6%, even people at the lower end of society, of the socioeconomic equation, can afford to buy a house. And we've tested this in Bangladesh, the Philippines, and we've started to have a look at Pakistan, and it looks highly likely. So it doesn't seem to be a problem. So you've got the economic motor of real estate. Now, no developers on the side raking in billions of dollars, right? That's not happening. But what we have is a motor that actually creates the infrastructure that people move into. Then there's the infrastructure that supports them, the schools, the medical centres, the retail, the commercial, all the sports centres, everything. All of that is as much money again in creating infrastructure that can be used by the people who are living there. And all of this, if it's run commercially and not by government, will generate an income. So people would pay for the use of a basketball court. I'm notwithstanding that there'll be some free half courts in the parklands. You could knock a ball around on a cricket pitch anywhere. But, you know, if you want to run a cinema, you're going to make money. And so you can pay rent or you can buy your commercial property out of the system. So all I'm describing is normal commerce in a capitalist society. But I'm taking the usury out of it. And so now we've created all the residences and all the commercial, retail, sporting and leisure. Now, on top of that, you've got the services, the power generation, the water systems to get water to everyone, the rubbish disposal. How do you get rid of sewage? How do you pick up all the waste? These things are also viable businesses, as we know around the world. The waste management's a huge industry. There's money in rubbish, as they say. So if you control that, you don't have to lease it out to corporations, though you could do. The income that you, as a city, you would generate from that would pay off the cost of the infrastructure at the outset. So all of the things can be paid for commercially over a reasonable period, not over a lifetime or even, you know, you can pay these things off 17 years, even quicker in some instances. Same with the movie sets and water theme parks. And these are all viable commercial enterprises. All it takes is what I would call critical mass, like a nuclear reaction needs critical mass before it actually takes off. Cities are the same. If you've got all the right parts in it, suddenly it's just fully functioning. So, okay, so the thing is financially viable. So you have a few options on how you get it kicked off. And that is either to be given the money or lent the money or be given the money for equity. Okay, so there's three ways of generating that much capital. And I would anticipate that we're talking 25, 30 billion US dollars to kick off a city of this size, right? And so that money exists and it can come in and override, not override, there are funds, humanitarian funds that will say, okay, we like what you're doing. Here's your $25 billion. You don't have to pay us back. We just want to own a third of it. Okay. So if there's income, likely to be income from sale of electricity and water and retail and commercial spaces. Okay, they get a third of the profit. And so that's one way of doing it. Another way is that some super rich person comes in and says, I want to own a city. Can be done, so long as they don't, the power doesn't go to their head and they start trying to run the whole thing themselves, because they won't, just because they've got a lot of money doesn't mean they know how to create and run a city. But so long as someone smart enough to stand back and let us do that, then they own the whole thing. That's not as good for Pakistan, but it's still a way of getting a city going. And then the other way is that the government steps up and puts the seed money in and gets paid back from sale of real estate out of the development. And all of these are possible.
Ask a few questions there.
Yeah. So all of these are possible and do already happen around the planet. So what is the best model? The best model is a benevolent humanitarian fund that steps in and goes, well, we like that. Here's your money. Just cut us in for a third and we'll just stand back. Knock yourselves out. That's the best model. And then at some time in the future, you can buy out that humanitarian fund if you think that's wise, or not, doesn't matter. The argument is that if you make enough money, don't pay out the original investor, partner with them again, make a second one, you get there faster. So there's a whole lot of conspiring thoughts that have to be had to make this model work. So that's essentially how that works. So I hope that was clear, guys. Do you have any questions about the background mechanism?
Does there be any questions from your side? I know you're itching to ask.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I'm already in love with this model because I remember the last time we spoke about this was a couple of years ago, I guess, when you were in Pakistan. Last year, was it? early
Yeah,
last.
sure. But we've gone away, and there's a lot of work that's gone into this, both from Will's team, from the UK team. So, you know, we've not been sat around. There's a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes on this now.
And I think what I noticed now is that it is now in a very much more improved form, much more improved state. Why? Because just like Will mentioned earlier, that Imran Khan, our prime minister, has announced these sort of schemes, not just one, but many of such schemes. He has announced scattered all over the country, where it was part of the manifesto of this political party, PTI, they call it, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, that they were supposed to generate housing for 5 million families, then 100 million of employment, and that 10 billion or 1 billion tree tsunami campaign. I don't know if it's 10 billion tree or 1 billion tree.
10 billion.
10 billion.
10 billion. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think in these three programs that we have had so far, these three programs that we've discussed together, I think it not only covers these three aspects of Imran Khan's intent, but also adds a bit of more elements to it with that food cube and other elements that you've added, which have come with the ideas that you have planned for. Yeah, please go ahead.
One thing I forgot to say, which is quite important, is that in the city, in the Islamabad Global Leisure City, there's a bed work balance. So the number of people who live in the city who are employable have a job, because we've balanced that. We've actually worked out retail, commercial, light industry, government, how many jobs are there, and that is equated to the number of employable people. And so what we've done, and I'm going to take you back to the pre-industrial revolutionary family, I'm predicting that so we're going to allow for every family 1.5 jobs, and they'll be paid well enough that that's all that needs to happen, with an intention of working the model up so that only one person in a family needs to work.
Just like in the good old days.
Just like in the good old days, yeah, we all remember that. So that's important, that the actual master plan model calculates the number of jobs and then dedicates. So it starts off with the number of people we want to have living in the city, and then we go, well, how many light industry jobs, how many retail, commercial, government? That's all calculated off it, and they're all broken down into those clans and those villages and the townships. So all these people just need to walk to work in their area. But if they want to go and get a serious bit of sport or medicine, they've got to go get on public transport to go to town. So you see how complete the model is. Yeah.
As we were going through the model, I could see how, I mean, within my mind, I could see those tiny little creatures building this city, and also getting jobs of many sorts in that. I see that. But what I wanted to add to that is when Raza Bhai mentioned the question of how to finance that, and then you mentioned a couple of methods of how it is possible, how Jala is designed, and how microfinance banking can generate these sort of loans for a person to person and family to family to occupy, to own a certain square meters area in that model village of Philippines and Bangladesh, for that matter. But I think in a country like Pakistan, there's one positive thing that can add to this project, is that the real estate industry in Pakistan is probably the richest industry currently on planet Earth, I would say. Why? Because there are pieces of land in near Islamabad, which is the area of focus of your model. There are pieces of land which are actually more expensive than Hollywood and more expensive than California, Southern California, that is. So the thing is that if these sort of models have just like I could see this, I could picture this, that Pakistan government showing interest. Why? Because if you bring as they say over here in these business terms, they call it the SPVs, the special purpose vehicles. The special purpose vehicles work in Pakistan in a way that the government of Pakistan builds a state-owned company, which is partially or fully owned by the government itself. And then it starts to add partners. For instance, Argo comes in, or XYZ, whatever company that you wish to formulate. These companies, your companies come and join this SPV, this special purpose vehicle, whatever name they would give it to. And you would partner with them. They would then put this land, because you're talking about hectares, thousands of hectares, as we discussed earlier.
Square kilometers, yeah. Mm.
Yes, if there's so much of land, and that is the most expensive. Please keep that in mind. In Pakistan, it is the most expensive thing that exists, real estate. So if the government puts this equity in the shape of land, which would go into billions anyway, in rupees, I would say in billions. And then it would say that, okay, in this SPV, we put our equity as land. And then ideas like Jala or other sources could come in with because they would, once the government shows interest, I can tell you that they would not let you have the majority of the cake anyway. They're going to say, okay, we're going to keep 51% at the lowest, and we would give you 49%. These sort of arrangements the government would make with you, and then they also add a lot of other things to reduce the cost that may incur in the process, so that all the cost that the government has to pay comes non-liquid based, meaning it could be human resource, it could be electricity, it could be gas, it could be water, it could be just like you mentioned, solar or other alternate sources of energy, and of course, as we said, the land. So this is a very, very doable model if your company intends to, the way you do, intend to join hands with the government of Pakistan.
So we all work as a group. So we're working under an umbrella called Bion. And so Argo, Jala, Blue Ring, Raza's group, we're all coming together to make this happen, right?
Yeah.
None of us want to own a city. Oh my goodness, none of us are megalomaniacs. We want to get this model going for the benefit of, in the first instance, the people without houses. And the solution is to make a satellite city that's fully functional. So that's tremendously rewarding in its own right. Obviously, we need to get paid because we've got costs as well. But the ownership of it obviously is not going to be us. I don't want to, I live in Brisbane in Australia. I don't want to own cities in Pakistan. I'm not, it's not what it's about. So they're meant to be self-propelling. So once the model's up, I really hope that people just copy it and run with it.
Yeah, but
because there's so much to be done,
Government would want you to keep the 49%, I would say, for the rest of your lives. Why? Because they know that you are the people, the mind behind the whole game, and you know how to bring quality and standards into the system. And because once the equity is transferred 100% to the Pakistan government, I can tell you right away that it's going to go down. It's going to be ruined.
The way equity is distributed is really formulaic. Again, it's to do with kilojoules, if you bear with me. How much effort you put in translates to what you own, right? It's totally equitable. And so the split often is a quarter to a third is the land, a third to a half is the funds, and the rest is getting it done, the group who actually make it happen, all the sweat equity that goes into that and the intellectual property. That's the breakdown. And this is all able to be calculated and people will come up with a fair thing. If the government wants to have 51%, then show us the money is all I can say, because the land won't cut it. Yeah, it's got to be a little bit more. Notwithstanding, I'm not going to stand in the way of a good deal, because, the idea is to get a city built, not to argue about the ownership. But I'm just stating for the record that these things are very easy to calculate. They're done all the time, and it has to be done transparently. And I've always found with these big deals, it also works for little deals, between family members. They have to be equitable. If one of the partners thinks that they're getting ripped off, or they're not putting in as much, or they're putting in nothing and getting more, then the whole thing falls apart very quickly. So everyone has to be happy with their lot, and it has to be done equitably. That's all I'm going to say on that. But if the government wants to keep control, totally possible. It's not our point to keep control. Our point is to help maintain the success. We're happy to do that even without ownership. As a consultancy is another way of doing that. So there's many ways of going, because frankly, once the Islamic Global Leisure City is done, we've got number 2 to do, and number 3 and number 4. And they're not all going to be in Pakistan. They can be in Africa or Philippines. They've got to be done. People will start seeing it, or in Russia, all places, Iran. It doesn't matter. People are people, I would say. And if people are in need, then we'll put our hand up. And if they're prepared to play fairly, then this can be done anyway. That's the thing. And you think that I want to be hanging on to an equity in a town over here when all this other stuff is needing to be done? It's not the way it works. Certainly not the way my brain works, that's for sure.
No, I totally understand. And it's just that when I look at these things, when I get to hear the wonderful concepts and ideas that Raza Bhai has in his head, or you come up with together, I tend to think about the doability of that and immediate doability of that, so that maybe we could, pull some strings immediately and get these things on ground practically, because you've done most of the work anyway. You've done the hard bit, and now it's just a matter of just clicking certain things together, putting certain things together, clicking certain things, and making these things happen. And Raza Bhai is a very well-connected, resourceful person. He knows Pakistan, and he's got teams on the ground also. You've got everything. You've got all the cards in your hands. I think it's just a matter of now sitting on the table and rolling the dice, I would say.
Yep, and this is the beauty of this system.
Some indication timescale, Zubin. Sorry, Will. Yeah, I mean, we're edging towards it. There's still some planning that needs to be done from our side. Once we are ready with everything to present to either government or to the stakeholders, that's when we'll be entering Pakistan with the complete plan. So there's a few bits missing, which we hope to tie up. But I reckon within the next 6 months, I think we would be in a good position to sort of move forward with this.
I would hope so. Yeah.
The next 6 months are very crucial and critical for Pakistan, also because of the political conditions now changing the complexion a bit. But so let's see. That's sufficient time, I guess, for everybody, from your side and from the government of Pakistan side, from the people's side also, to see, because when in a country like Pakistan, when political turmoil starts to show its colors, then people also get to they become kind of the conservative in terms of spending or utilizing their assets in projects like these. So it is. I think 6 months is a good time for everybody to formulate things and to see how to go about this proposal with the government or without the government, with private stakeholders, or however the model may be.
I think we've touched upon Jala quite a few times, Will. I think it'd be good to bring the architect of Jala in at some stage on discussions as well.
Yeah, I spoke to Mushin.
Is once again a wonderful.
Yeah. I spoke to Mushin about just that. I said, you really do need to come and become part of this these sessions.
Maybe
he's
in fact next week's discussion we incorporate him in.
Yeah,
to the discussion.
Absolutely,
it'd be a great introduction for him as well.
He's in Berlin at the moment, so he'll be just fine.
That's fine. I think the timing would be suitable as well. Let's try and wrap up. I think we've exceeded our time frame once again, but it's been wonderful to hear and present the program. So let's conclude on that point, if we may.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about these things. Very important nation-building stuff. It's good that the forum's here.
So, any final thoughts from yourself?
Just like in the beginning, Will said that the first thing we could also, and my is the first program also, we could probably next week we could also have a recap of both the first and second episode, just a quick recap where Will could quickly go through both these things, and if we can have the architect behind Jala on board next week, but then it would also make sense to recall episode 1 and episode 2 because both of them seem to have.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Zubi. There's so much feedback from someone who isn't on mute that it's impossible to hear.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's.
There's
I'll do that.
Is it?
There
we go.
Okay,
one of
thank
the
you.
participants unawareingly had that. Yeah, so what we could do is next week we could have a quick recap of both the first and second episode, and if in the presence of the architect behind Jala, it would make sense also because Jala is connected to all these projects one way or the other, I would say. So maybe we could do that next week.
Very good.
Sure. Okay, I think that's a good plan. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks again, gentlemen. Great to talk to you.
Okay. Thank you from the Grey Lounge from my side, and I hope to see you next week with more ideas to discuss.
Okay, fantastic. Talk to you then, gentlemen. Bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.